Hello everyone, my name is Foreas and welcome to my channel. Now, let's face it, times are pretty tough. Cost of living is up, rent is up, and quite frankly, it seems that everyone is suffering but the top of town. That's quite frustrating, isn't it? You must be asking yourself, how is that fair? Now, putting aside neoliberalism and classism in our modern society, you might feel indignation as to your current circumstances. But the funny thing is, this rage towards societal structures has its origins in leftist ideology, and it comes from one word: anarchism. And that's what we'll be exploring today. If you're new here, this is a series of video essays where I cover political, economic, and revolutionary topics which are relevant to our time. I read the books, so you don't have to. In a world where money rules the land, there is one critique that is left unspoken. Integrity leads to innovation. Innovation leads to inequity. Inequity leads to insanity. Join me as we explore the four eyes of capitalism. If this is your first time here, consider subscribing for more content in the future. So, let's jump right in. Now, we all know the sentiments of the system is rigged and the general perception of unfairness when interacting with political institutions. While these attitudes have been co-opted for more nefarious means, these feelings are couched in one of the foundational ideologies of socialist thinking, namely the ideology of anarchism. So, what is anarchism? Well, if we ask good old Google, it's a political theory advocating the abolition of hierarchical government and the organization of society on a voluntary, cooperative basis without recourse to force or compulsion. Okay, well, what does that all mean? Well, it might be good to go back to one of the forefathers of anarchism, Michael Bakunin, and the foundational work God and the State. Now, anarchism was a school of thought that was born out of the French Revolution and the writings of Proudhon. But effectively, they were a response to the tennis court oath and the establishment of liberty, equality, and fraternity during the French Revolution. It's important to take note of the French origins because Bakunin was making a distinction between the idealists, that is, the clergy, first estate, and the nobility, the second estate, and what Bakunin considered the materialists, who were anarchists and socialists like himself. Three elements, or if you like, three fundamental principles, constitute the essential conditions of all human development: collective or individual in history. 1. Human abnormality. 2. Thought. 3. Rebellion. 2. The first probably corresponds to social and private economy, to the second, science, to the third, liberty. To Bakunin, idealists had abandoned the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity for the comfort of institutional authority. To anarchists at the time, what had been identified is institutions reinforce themselves, not on logic, but authority. There is a class of people who, if they do not believe, must at least make a semblance of believing. This class, comprising all the tormentors, all the oppressors, and all the exploiters of humanity: priests, monarchs, statesmen, soldiers, public and private financiers, officials of all sorts, policemen, gerrymanders, jailers and executioners, monopolists, capitalists, tax leechers, contractors and landlords, lawyers, economists, politicians of all shades, down to the smallest vendor of sweetmeats. All will repeat in unison those words of Voltaire: "If God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him." For you understand that people must have a religion. That is their safety valve. So if authority and the actors within the system are just propping up a system, then Bakunin thinks said institution should be abolished. This is a fundamental tenet of anarchism. Institutions do not exist for their own sake. There must be a reason for them, or they restrict the liberty of materialists. Therefore, if God exists, only in one way could he serve human liberty, by ceasing to exist. A jealous lover of human liberty and deeming it the absolute condition of all that we admire and respect in humanity. I reverse the phrase of Voltaire and say that if God really existed, it would be necessary to abolish him. What effectively anarchists are fighting for is the abolition of hierarchical structures. I know that's a tall order to assert in today's society and economy, because people are tied to institutions. Now you must be asking yourself, well, 4AS, does that mean anarchists are against specialists? Not at all. There is a difference between the blind faith of an institution and exchanging expertise in a voluntary basis. I bow before the authority of special men because it is imposed upon me by my own reason. I am conscious of my inability to grasp in all its details and positive developments. Any very large portion of human knowledge I receive and I give, such is human life. Each directs and is directed in his turn. Therefore, there is no fixed and constant authority, but a continual exchange of mutual, temporary, and above all, voluntary authority and subordination. So to use an example, say I am an accountant and I encounter a carpenter. It is the logical process of identifying the flaws of my expertise and engaging the carpenter to make a table and some chairs for me because I have found that gap in my knowledge. Or vice versa. If the carpenter is not sure how to lodge their tax return and all the relevant supporting documents, as an accountant, I could point them in the right direction. But the most relevant lesson, I would argue, that Bakunin and anarchists have given people today is one word: skepticism. The blind following of institutions is abhorred by anarchists, and you can see why in today's political climate. When you have institutions which are accountable to themselves rather than citizens, it's understandable why people become disillusioned. Whilst I have touched on Philip Lowe and the RBA's response to the profit price spiral in a previous video essay, this devoid of reality trust in institutions does produce scandal after scandal. The most recent one in Australia being the PWC Scandal. For the non-Australians in the audience, PWC is part of the big four accounting firms in Australia that deal with a lot of multinational organisations. Now, I don't have to tell anyone that conflict of interest is a pretty common principle for any profession in the modern era. But that principle did not stop with PWC. Who in their right mind would engage a player to bat for two different teams in the same competition? As it turns out, the Australian government does. And they do so as a matter of routine. Recent improper conduct inside consulting firm PWC has drawn attention to the practice. Their head of international tax, Peter Collins, who regularly attended a consultation group set up by the Treasury and by the Board of Taxation to provide confidential advice to government on measures to combat international tax avoidance, has been caught sharing confidential documents setting out proposed legislation and policy positions with other PWC personnel, both in Australia and overseas, who in turn disclosed it to their corporate clients or potential clients. This caused a huge uproar for good reason, which PWC tried to ride out to no avail. The scandal has filled the front pages of Australian news sites and will continue to do so. PWC has so far gone through the whole gambit of PR containment strategies. At first, when the AFR broke the story in January, they just hoped it would go away, with the scapegoat tax partner John Collins suspended from practice and having left the firm. Then they tried to minimize it, saying it was only a few who knew. That strategy spelt the end of Australian CEO Tom Seymour, who resigned on May the 8th. A new CEO in place tried the "we're so very sorry, it won't happen again" line, followed by commissioning an internal review headed by Ziggy Switkowski, a former client of the firm. But by now, it had grown too big to contain. Ministers got involved, senators started asking questions and demanding that names be named. More damning emails were revealed, and government agencies were told to stop engaging with the firm. This week, 9 more PWC partners were stood down. So far, US mainstream media have been mostly quiet, preoccupied with the political shenanigans over the US debt ceiling, perhaps. CNBC, Bloomberg, and Reuters have reported on it, of course, and London's Financial Times have covered it from the start. There's a reason why political journalists such as Michael West Media and Independent Australia use phrases like "holding them to account," because much like how Bakunin felt, what is good for the business community may not be good for the average citizen. Sure, that isn't the only value any journalist worth their salt believes in, but in today's society, we have undersold one of the origins of skepticism, which is key to analysing politics and financial institutions in the modern era. If you haven't already, like, share, and subscribe for more content in the future. And remember, folks, to keep thinking and keep learning. Goodbye till next time.